Why do most TEDx talks get seen by only a few hundred people? The statistics are depressing. In the month of October 2021, 76% of TEDx talks had less than 1,000 views. On average, TEDx talks in that month had only 411 views, and the lowest number was one with 26 views. Bilyana Georgieva, the curator of the unofficial top 10 TEDx chart, suggested that these stats indicated a limited reach beyond family and friends. I believe that this statistic is a far more worrisome number. Only a small number of speakers ever manage to get chosen to present an idea worth sharing on a TED or a TEDx stage. Would it not be a tragedy if only a few hundred heard it? The TED and TEDx stages are an incredible forum for really amazing, transformative, earth shaking ideas. For me, the problem is not the lack of ideas, it is the lack of reach for these great ideas and the lost opportunity for great impact that should really concern us. It is not the ones that get millions of views that should matter. It is the many that do not get seen that are concerning. The tree that falls unseen and unheard in the forest only becomes compost. The spread of an idea requires it to be shared. It needs to persist in the global conversation. Most people think of an idea going viral as strictly the number of people that come in contact with the viral message and they share and infect other people. But there's actually a second part of this equation that is just as important, and I'll come back to it. But first, let's take a look at this nature of viruses. What makes one viral infection produce a simple family outbreak? Another becomes a community epidemic, and a third a pandemic. The answer lies in the power of connection and engagement in a community to determine the survival and propagation. It turns out that nature has figured this out long before all of us. For a viral outbreak, only three possibilities exist for the potential transmission or decline of a disease, and that depends on the average number of people who will contract a contagious infection from one person with the disease. If each infected person spreads the infection to less than one person, then the disease will decline in the community and eventually die out because the transmission is less than a 1 is to 1 ratio. But if each infected person spreads the infection to one other person, then the disease will stay alive and stable in the community, but it will not become an epidemic or an outbreak because the transmission ratio is just 1 is to 1. Finally, if each existing infection causes more than one new infection, it is a greater than 1 is to 1 transmission ratio, and there may be an outbreak or an epidemic. In the early days of COVID example, it would infect 3 to 6 new individuals from each infected patient, and which explains the wildfire spread of the disease as due to a 1 is to 3 or 1 is to 6 transmission in a classic case of global virality. Framed in the context of a message, think of a population of infected individuals as a community and think of the virus as a message that is passed on in the community. An infection propagation rate of 3 or higher makes it very likely that the spread would become exponential. The first criteria for an exponential spread is ease of transmission and penetration. Viruses accomplish this by using specialized receptors on their surface that bind to receptors on the human host cell and allow the virus to penetrate into the human host cell and deliver its payload of infective genetic material for the human cell to make copies of the virus and spread it out. In the case of a talk or a video that becomes viral, the message has to capture the engagement of the audience by exciting a portion of the brain that is the seat of their emotion, called the amygdala. The human brain is an amazing organ, and we commonly pride ourselves as creatures of reason and intellect. But our rational and intellectual functions reside in the portion of the brain called the neocortex, which is all this area that I show in this model. But our emotions reside in a deep seated portion of the brain, a primitive part known as the amygdala, shown by these two red peanut sized circles. The amygdala is where we live and experience fear, rage, fury, love, lust, affection, attraction, repulsion, desire, sexual proclivity, procreative drives, possession and territoriality, tribalism, and so on. Only a talk or a video that excites our emotional centers in the amygdala will be remembered because the amygdala is tightly linked with memory. Contrary to popular belief, we decide with our emotions that reside in the centers of our primitive brain, the amygdala, and we use the intellectual reasoning of the neocortex to justify and execute the strategies that will actualize the gut instincts of our emotional centers. The best TED and TEDx talks all have the same mechanism. They operate by artful delivery that activates the emotional centers of the amygdala and support it with the rationalizations of the neocortex. They use the fabric of emotional connection through the amygdala, stitched with the threads of neocortical reasoning to create communion with the audience. And when there is communion, communication happens and a community is born. A community is not a collection of bodies occupying the same space. A community is a collection of hearts speaking the same speech. When Martin Luther King declares, I have a dream, he activates the amygdala of 200,000 listeners on the reflecting pool at the foot of Lincoln Memorial, and 200,000 hearts respond with the same speech, I have a dream. But simple activation of emotion will not allow for persistence of the message. For that, something more is needed. And this is where we learn a lesson from Africa. On the African savanna, grazing animals never drink at the water hole alone. There will be zebra, giraffe, wildebeest, warthogs, elephants, and antelope all gathered around a single water hole, even when the many mouths are confronted with a shrinking resource. The answer lies in the safety they experience from predation. As a diverse community with varying sensory and situational awareness, they can keep each other safe and hence increase the odds that all of them have the best opportunity for both water consumption and survival, since either alone is meaningless. These two examples from biology demonstrate that viruses and warthogs use a strategy for their own propagation and survival that I call the viral waterhole effect. The greatest chance for successful growth and survivability of any endeavor happens when there is a community of new participants that are engaged in each round of propagation. And it was this principle that I wanted to capture in my journey towards the TEDx stage. 90 days before my talk, I used the same community effect to propagate my TEDx talk. I started writing blogs and posts and articles and newsletters about my selection and preparation, my flubs and successes, my anxieties and my excitement. And with each post, I was creating ripples of engagement and successive cycles of exposure to the message of my impending talk. My 5,000 patients, my 2,000 Facebook friends, my 1,500 LinkedIn connections, my high school in eastern India where I graduated 50 years ago. These were my community for the virus of my message. And my community was getting exposure twice a week about my journey, and their fever was mounting along with mine. My writings and my posts were acting like the attachment receptor that viruses use and connecting my community to the message of my impending TEDx talk. By the time I delivered my talk on October 5th, I had written enough material to compile all my articles, posts, and blogs into a book that I published on Amazon at the same time as my talk went live on YouTube. But I adopted the strategy of the waterhole by also adding live links to the talks of everyone in my community of speakers who shared the TEDx Gary stage with me. I wrote about the Gary, Indiana community, their aspirations and challenges, about how the TEDx platform was acting as an agent of social change and revitalization of the community by bringing the ideas of empowerment and hope from speakers from all over the world. I wrote about the restaurant I had my meals, included a link to their website. I spoke of their wonderful service and the fantastic food, included pictures of my experience, the Airbnb I stayed at its website. By including the rest of the TEDx speakers and the larger community that hosted the event was a replication of the waterhole effect and analogous to allowing a diverse community to drink with me at my waterhole. I then sent links of the talk and a free digital copy of my book to my followers and my community online. The effect was massive. Everyone in Gary, Indiana, and all the speakers shared my talk and the book widely to their networks. My high school principal in India held a watch party with the entire school, all 5,000 students of them. They shared and reshared all over India and Southeast Asia. The talk went viral across the globe. 44 days later, it crossed a million views on Christmas Eve. But there is a second half of the equation that I didn't realize that I had accidentally tapped into. Instead of just making myself a single patient zero, I had made everyone who was part of my journey a patient zero as well. It was their talk as much as it was mine. My road to the red dot became their road. We became one community with a single shared idea infecting all of us, and everyone was a patient zero and a super spreader. all of us were one global community infected with the virus of my TEDx talk, sharing it in feverish engagement and excitement. The enduring message in all of this for us is that the power of community connected by shared validation that produces engagement in a shared idea and the common desire to collectively experience something that they can identify with has the same operational characteristic as a viral pandemic. The need to be seen, heard, and validated is a fundamental trait of all humans. And when this need is coupled with an idea that people can emotionally engage with and that ignites their imagination with a sense of possibility and belonging, they naturally spread it to their network of friends and family. Except that this time, instead of falling sick, they all are elevated to a higher state of shared existence. And that is an idea worth sharing and thinking again upon. Thank you.